Her family mocked her when she married a man in a wheelchair, unaware he's a billionaire CEO. The wedding hall in Ikeja had gone quiet, but not the good kind of quiet. You could have married anybody, Aunty Grace hissed, loud enough for half the room to hear as she watched the groom being wheeled toward the altar by his best man. Anybody, Gloria, and you chose this. Gloria didn't turn around. She kept her eyes forward on the man waiting for her. Daniel, calm and steady in his wheelchair, dressed simply, watching her walk toward him with the kind of quiet certainty that had drawn her to him in the first place. She's ruining her life, someone else murmured, not quietly enough. A grown man who can't even stand at his own wedding. What kind of future is that? Gloria's mother said nothing, but her silence was its own kind of judgment. The tight-lipped disappointment of a woman who had imagined, for 26 years, a very different son-in-law standing at that altar. Daniel heard every word. He always did. He simply never let it reach his face. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Gloria quietly as she reached him, his voice low enough that only she could hear it over the whispers still rippling through the pews. "You don't have to prove anything to them." "I'm not marrying you for them," Gloria said, taking his hand. "I never was." What none of them knew, not Aunty Grace, not the whispering cousins, not even Gloria's own mother, sitting stiffly in the front row, was that the quiet man in the wheelchair they'd spent the entire morning pitying controlled more wealth than every person in that hall combined, and had chosen deliberately, for reasons none of them understood yet, to let them believe otherwise. That secret wouldn't stay buried much longer. Welcome to Becky Reality Stories. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Where are you watching from? I would like to connect with you better. Like, comment, and subscribe. 2 years before that wedding day, Gloria Okafor was 24 years old, working as a physiotherapist at a rehabilitation clinic in Surulere, and had never once imagined her life intersecting with anyone remotely resembling a billionaire. She liked her work precisely because it asked nothing of appearances. Patients came to her stripped of whatever status they carried outside the clinic doors. CEOs and cleaners alike reduced to the same slow, patient work of relearning how to move a limb, rebuild a muscle, trust a body that had betrayed them. Gloria had a gift for it. An unhurried patience, a refusal to treat anyone's recovery as a performance for onlookers. Daniel arrived at the clinic on a Tuesday morning in March, wheeled in by a driver who didn't say much. Dressed in clothes too plain to suggest anything about who he was, carrying a referral file that listed his occupation simply as businessman. "Mr. Adewale," Gloria said, reading his chart. "You're here for the spinal rehabilitation program?" "Daniel is fine," he said. "And yes, though I should warn you, I've been through 4 physiotherapists already. They all seem to eventually decide I'm not worth the effort." "Why is that?" "Because I don't respond well to being spoken to, like I've already given up." He said it without bitterness, just as a plain observation. Most people look at a man in a wheelchair and decide, somewhere in the first 5 minutes, exactly how much of him is still worth talking to. Gloria set down his file and looked at him properly for the first time, not at the wheelchair but at him. "I don't do that. Give me 5 minutes to prove it, not the other way around." Something shifted in his expression, subtle but real. It was, she would learn much later, the first time in almost 2 years that anyone had spoken to him like that. He came 3 times a week for 6 months, and somewhere in the slow, unglamorous rhythm of resistance exercises and small, hard-won improvements, something grew between them that neither of them planned for, and both of them, for a while, tried to ignore. Daniel never mentioned his work beyond vague references to meetings and the office. And Gloria never pressed. She'd learned, in her years at the clinic, that patients revealed themselves at their own pace, and pushing usually cost more trust than it earned. She knew he was comfortable, certainly. His driver, his clothes, the quiet efficiency with which his medical bills were always settled before she even saw the invoices. But comfortable, in Surulere, could mean 100 different things, and Gloria genuinely never thought to wonder which one it was. "You never ask what I do," Daniel observed one afternoon, midway through a session, watching her adjust the resistance on his exercise equipment. "Should I?" "Most people do, usually before they ask my name." Gloria shrugged, focused on his form. I already know the part of you that matters for this room. The rest is yours to share whenever you want to. He was quiet for a long moment. That might be the first genuinely kind thing anyone said to me in longer than I'd like to admit. He told her the truth. Finally, on the evening he asked her to dinner for the first time. Not the wheelchair, which she already understood intimately by then, but the other thing, the thing he'd been carefully omitting for 6 months. Before this goes any further, he said, in a quiet restaurant in Victoria Island he'd chosen specifically because it was unlikely to have anyone who recognized him, there's something you should know about me. I'm not just comfortable. I run Adewale Maritime Holdings. I've run it since my father died 8 years ago. I'm worth considerably more than most people ever imagine when they meet me. Gloria set down her fork, processing this with the same steady patience she brought to everything. Why are you telling me now and not 6 months ago? Because 6 months ago, I didn't trust anyone enough to know the difference between someone who wanted me and someone who wanted what I have. You're the first person in years who never once seemed curious about the answer. He paused. I needed to know you'd choose this, choose me, before you knew there was a fortune attached to the choice. And if I'd asked, back at the beginning, would you have told me then? Honestly, no. I would have found a polite way to disappear from your patient roster. He met her eyes. I've been burned before, Gloria. People who saw the wheelchair and the company name in the same sentence and decided the second thing made the first thing worth tolerating. Gloria was quiet for a moment, absorbing not just what he'd revealed, but what it implied. Years of loneliness dressed up as caution, a man who'd learned to hide his own worth as thoroughly as he'd learned to hide his wealth. I chose you 6 months ago, she said finally. Nothing you just told me changes what I chose. It just explains why you were so careful about letting me. He proposed 8 months later, in the same unassuming restaurant where he'd first told her the truth, and asked her, genuinely, carefully, whether she wanted the wedding to reflect who he actually was, publicly and completely, or whether she'd rather keep that part of their life private for a while longer. Your family will have opinions either way, he said. But I'd rather they have opinions about a man in a wheelchair than opinions shaped by my bank account. At least the first version is honest about what they actually think of me. Gloria understood, better than he perhaps realized, exactly what he was protecting. Not his fortune, but the fragile, hard-won certainty that someone had chosen him for reasons that had nothing to do with it. Then we keep it quiet, she said. For now. Let them see exactly what they think they're getting. She had no idea, agreeing to that request out of love and respect for the man she was marrying, exactly how cruel her own family would be about what they thought they saw. The engagement announcement, when Gloria finally made it to her family, did not go the way she'd hoped, though she'd braced herself for something close to it. A man in a wheelchair, her mother repeated, setting down her cup of tea with careful, deliberate slowness, the way she did whenever she was working hard to control her tone. Gloria, you're 25 years old, beautiful, educated, and you're telling me you've chosen a man who can't even walk you down the aisle himself? He can be wheeled down the aisle just fine, Mummy. That's not the part that should worry you. Don't be smart with me. You know exactly what I mean. Her mother's voice tightened. What kind of life is that? Who will provide for you? Who will help you carry things, fix things, be a proper husband in the ways that matter? He provides for himself just fine, Gloria said, choosing her words carefully, holding back the fuller truth she'd promised Daniel she wouldn't reveal yet. He has a business. He's not struggling, Mummy. A small business, doing what, exactly? You've never even said. It's complicated. I don't fully explain his work. He doesn't fully explain mine. That's not the point. Her mother studied her for a long moment, then sighed, the particular sigh of a woman who had already decided the conversation was lost but intended to keep having it anyway. I just don't want you to spend your whole life as a nurse to a man who can never truly take care of you the way a wife deserves to be taken care of. He already takes care of me, Gloria said quietly. You just haven't given him the chance to show you how. Aunty Grace, when she heard, was significantly less restrained than Gloria's mother had been. "A cripple," she said flatly, at a family gathering 2 weeks later, not bothering to lower her voice even as Gloria stood close enough to hear every word. "Gloria has gone and engaged herself to a cripple. After everything her parents sacrificed for her education, this is what she brings home." "Auntie, please don't call him that." "What should I call him then? A man who needs to be pushed around like a child?" "Gloria, I'm saying this because I love you. You are throwing your future away out of pity. Marry a man like that, and in 10 years you'll be exhausted, resentful, and stuck. Nobody will blame you for leaving, but by then you'll have wasted the best years of your life." "It's not pity," Gloria said, her voice shaking slightly, despite her effort to keep it steady. "You don't know him. None of you know him." "I know enough," Aunty Grace said. "I know what I can see." That phrase would come back to haunt her, months later, in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The wedding planning proceeded despite the family's disapproval, though despite undersold exactly how much friction it involved. Gloria's father, a quieter man than his wife, at least made an effort to meet Daniel properly. A dinner arranged at Gloria's small flat, Daniel wheeling himself in, dressed plainly, polite and measured in a way that seemed to genuinely surprise Gloria's father, even if it didn't fully win him over. "You seem like a decent man," her father said carefully, over a meal Gloria had cooked herself. "I won't pretend I understand my daughter's choice completely, but I can see she's chosen someone who treats her with respect. That matters more to me than most of what my wife and sister worry about." "Thank you, sir," Daniel said. "I don't expect anyone's approval right away. I only ask for the chance to earn it, the same way I'd ask for the chance to earn anything else." It was the most generous exchange the family managed in the entire lead-up to the wedding. And even that generosity didn't survive contact with Aunty Grace, who spent the following weeks quietly working to convince Gloria's mother that the marriage should be stopped entirely, before it's too late for her to change her mind with dignity. The week before the wedding, Aunty Grace made one final attempt, cornering Gloria alone in the kitchen of the family house. "You still have time," she said, her voice softer now, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Nobody will think less of you for calling it off. Everyone will understand." A woman who realized, before it was too late, that she deserved more than a life of pushing a wheelchair around. "I don't want more than Daniel," Gloria said. "I want him. That's not a compromise, Auntie. That's a choice. You're young. You don't understand yet what a hard life actually costs a person. In 10 years, when you're tired and lonely and doing everything alone while your friends have husbands who can actually stand beside them." "He stands beside me in every way that's ever actually mattered," Gloria interrupted, her patience finally fraying. "You've spent months deciding what my marriage will look like based on what you can see from the outside. You've never once asked what it actually feels like from where I'm standing." Aunty Grace's expression tightened, offended rather than convinced. "Fine. Marry him. But don't come to me in 10 years asking for sympathy when you finally understand what everyone tried to tell you." "I won't need sympathy," Gloria said quietly, turning to leave the kitchen. "You'll understand that soon enough, too." She had no idea saying those words in frustration rather than certainty, exactly how soon or how completely. Her family's version of pity would collapse under the weight of a truth none of them had bothered to ask about. The wedding day arrived at a small hall in Ikeja. Small deliberately, at Daniel's request, though Gloria's mother had campaigned hard for something grander, unaware that grand was precisely what Daniel had spent years avoiding. The whispers started before the ceremony even began, moving through the pews like a current. Aunty Grace, seated near the front in her finest lace, made no effort to keep her commentary private, narrating the groom's arrival, wheeled in by his best man, dressed simply, unassumingly, as though providing color commentary for an audience that hadn't asked for it. "You could have married anybody," she hissed, loud enough for half the room to hear, as Daniel was wheeled toward the altar. "Anybody, Gloria. And you chose this." "She's ruining her life," someone else murmured. "A grown man who can't even stand at his own wedding. What kind of future is that?" Gloria's mother said nothing, but her silence carried the same judgment it had carried for the past year. The tight-lipped disappointment of a woman still privately hoping even now that her daughter might come to her senses. Daniel heard every word. He always did. He simply never let it reach his face. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Gloria quietly as she reached him at the altar. "You don't have to prove anything to them." "I'm not marrying you for them," Gloria said, taking his hand. "I never was." The ceremony proceeded, vows exchanged, rings placed on trembling fingers, and if any of the whispering relatives noticed the quiet dignity with which Daniel spoke his vows, steady, certain, entirely unbothered by the pity radiating from half the room, none of them thought to reconsider what that dignity might actually mean. The reception was where everything finally came apart. It started with an unfamiliar car pulling into the modest venue's parking area. Not one car, but four, sleek and expensive, followed by two more that Gloria's cousins immediately recognized as belonging to men whose faces occasionally appeared in business newspapers. A murmur of confusion moved through the hall as a procession of clearly important guests began making their way inside. Board members, senior executives, two of Lagos's most prominent shipping magnates, all arriving not for the bride's family, but visibly, unmistakably, for the groom. "Who are these people?" Aunty Grace asked, watching a well-dressed man approach the high table and bow slightly toward Daniel with obvious deference. "Gloria, who are your husband's people?" Before Gloria could answer, one of the arriving guests, an older man, Gloria recognized as the chairman of a major logistics firm, reached the high table and extended his hand warmly. "Mr. Adewale," he said. "Congratulations. The board sends their regards. We didn't want to intrude on the ceremony itself, but we couldn't let the day pass without paying respects to our CEO on his wedding day." The word landed across the reception hall like a stone dropped into still water. CEO. Aunty Grace's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief, and finally something closer to dawning horror. "CEO of what exactly?" "Adewale Maritime Holdings," the chairman said, mildly surprised the question needed asking at all. "One of the largest shipping and logistics operations in West Africa. Surely you knew that, given the circumstances." He gestured, not unkindly, toward Daniel. "We've all been enormously relieved to see him find happiness again after everything following the accident." The silence that followed was total. Gloria's mother set down her drink very slowly, her eyes moving from Daniel to Gloria and back again, recalculating, in real time, an entire year of assumptions. "Gloria," she said carefully, "is this true?" "Yes, Mummy? You knew? This whole time? I've known for over a year. And you let us." Her mother's voice caught, embarrassment and confusion tangling together. "You let us say all those things, about him, about your future, and you never once corrected us?" "I asked her not to," Daniel said quietly, speaking for the first time since the chairman's arrival, his voice calm despite the dozens of eyes now fixed entirely on him. "I wanted to know your family's honest opinion of me, not one shaped by a company name or a bank balance. I've spent years being valued for the wrong reasons by people who claimed to love me. I needed to know, before I married your daughter, that at least one family in my life would judge me for who I actually am, wheelchair and all, rather than what I'm worth." He looked deliberately at Aunty Grace, whose earlier confidence had entirely drained from her face. "You called me a cripple, at a family gathering, within earshot of the woman I was about to marry. You told her she'd waste her best years pushing a broken man around. I want you to understand something clearly. None of that changes because you've just learned I'm wealthy. It only tells me exactly what kind of judgment you were making in the first place, and exactly whose approval was never worth chasing." Aunty Grace opened her mouth, closed it, and for the first time in the entire lead-up to the wedding, found herself with absolutely nothing to say. Gloria's father, watching from the second table, allowed himself the smallest, quietest smile. Not of vindication, but of something closer to relief. The private satisfaction of a man who had trusted his instincts about a son-in-law's character months before anyone confirmed his fortune. "I want to be clear about something," Daniel continued, his voice carrying easily across the now silent reception hall. "This isn't a reveal meant to humiliate anyone. I'm not interested in revenge, and neither is Gloria. But I think this family owes her an apology, not because I turned out to have money, but because she chose to defend a man's character against all of you for over a year, at real cost to her own peace. And she was right to. Gloria's mother, to her credit, was the first to move. Crossing the small distance to where Gloria stood and taking her daughter's hands in both of hers, something breaking open in her expression that looked finally like genuine shame rather than mere surprise. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I judged a man by what I could see, instead of asking my own daughter what she actually knew. I should have trusted you." Aunty Grace said nothing at all. Not that day, and not for a long while afterward, the weight of her own words, finally, publicly, settling on her in a room full of witnesses who would not soon forget them. The days following the wedding brought a shift in the family that no one, least of all Gloria, had fully anticipated. Not a graceful, immediate reconciliation, but something slower and more uneven. The kind of change that comes when people are forced to confront exactly how wrong they'd been, in front of witnesses, with no room left to quietly revise the story afterward. Gloria's mother called 2 days after the wedding, her voice smaller than Gloria had ever heard it. "I keep replaying it," she admitted. "All those months saying those things about him, about your future, and the entire time you knew. You just let us believe whatever we wanted to believe. Why? Because I needed to know if you'd have supported me anyway," Gloria said honestly. "Not because he's wealthy. Because he's kind and patient and treats me like an equal, and none of you cared enough to ask a single question about who he actually was as a person before deciding what kind of husband he'd make." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. I didn't ask. I looked at a wheelchair and decided I already knew everything I needed to know." "That's exactly what Aunty Grace did too." "Aunty Grace," her mother said carefully, "isn't handling this well." That turned out to be an understatement. Aunty Grace's humiliation at the reception had followed her well beyond the wedding hall, the story spreading quickly through the extended family and, inevitably, through the wider social circles that overlapped with Lagos's business community. She found herself, in the weeks that followed, the subject of exactly the kind of gossip and mockery she'd once specialized in delivering to others. Quietly excluded from conversations, met with pointed silence at family gatherings, her reputation for sharp opinions suddenly costing her the social standing she'd spent years building. She showed up at Gloria's new home 6 weeks after the wedding, uninvited, visibly smaller than the woman who'd once cornered Gloria in a kitchen to talk her out of the marriage. "I owe you an apology," she said, standing awkwardly in the doorway, none of her usual sharpness present in her voice. "Not because you married a rich man. Because I called your husband a cripple, in front of you, and I meant it as an insult to who he was as a person, not just a description. That was cruel, and I knew it was cruel while I was saying it, and I said it anyway because it made me feel like I understood something you didn't." Gloria studied her aunt for a long moment, remembering every version of this conversation she'd imagined having, none of which had prepared her for how small Aunty Grace actually looked, standing there without an audience to perform for. "I appreciate you saying that," Gloria said finally. "But I need you to understand something. If Daniel had turned out to be exactly what you assumed, a man with no fortune, no company, no board members showing up at his wedding, every word you said would still have been cruel. The apology doesn't mean much if it only arrived because the story changed. It should have arrived because you realized you were wrong to judge him at all." Aunty Grace absorbed this, something shifting behind her eyes. Not defensiveness this time, but genuine reckoning. "You're right. I think I need to sit with that a while longer before I ask you to forgive me properly." "That's fair," Gloria said. "Take the time, I'm not going anywhere." Daniel, for his part, handled the family's slow reckoning with the same patience he'd shown in every physiotherapy session Gloria had ever guided him through, neither seeking apology nor withholding forgiveness, simply allowing people the space to arrive at their own honesty in their own time. "You didn't have to give her that chance," Gloria said one evening, watching him review a business document at their kitchen table, months after the wedding, the earlier tension with her family finally beginning to soften into something like normalcy. "After what she said." I know what it's like to be dismissed because of how I look, Daniel said, not looking up from his papers. It would be strange for me to hold a permanent grudge against someone for finally learning that lesson, even if she learned it the hard way, and even if it took my bank account to teach it to her, rather than my character. You're more forgiving than I would be. I'm not forgiving because it's easy, he said, finally looking up at her. I'm forgiving because holding on to it costs me something I'd rather spend on you instead. 6 months after the wedding, Adewale Maritime Holdings quietly announced an expanded partnership with several rehabilitation clinics across Lagos, funding equipment and training programs for physiotherapists working with spinal injury patients. A project Daniel had insisted on keeping largely out of the press. The word inevitably traveled through the medical community that the initiative had been personally championed by the company's CEO, whose own recovery, years earlier, had been shaped by physiotherapists who'd treated him with dignity rather than pity. Gloria continued working at the same clinic in Surulere, in the same unhurried, patient way she always had, treating CEOs and cleaners with the identical quiet respect that had first drawn Daniel to her. Proof, if anyone in her family still needed it, that her character had never depended on knowing who anyone truly was underneath the surface. She'd simply always treated people as though they mattered, long before she had any reason to know it would matter back. A year after the wedding, Gloria's family gathered again. Not for another wedding, but for a simpler occasion. Sunday lunch at her parents' house, the kind of ordinary gathering that had once been unremarkable and now carried, quietly, the weight of everything that had changed in the 12 months between. Daniel came, as he always did now, wheeling himself confidently through the front door he'd once entered as a source of whispered pity. Gloria's father greeted him with the easy warmth of a man who'd earned the right to say, "I told you so," and chose, with visible restraint, not to. Aunty Grace was there too. It had taken her the better part of 8 months to arrive at the apology Gloria had told her to sit with. Not a dramatic public reversal, but a quiet conversation over tea one afternoon, where she'd finally said, without qualification or excuse, "I was wrong about him, and I was wrong about you for defending him. You saw something I refused to look for." "What changed?" Gloria had asked her. "I watched you two together at family things when nobody was performing for an audience anymore," Aunty Grace admitted. "He listens to you the way I've never seen a man listen to his wife. He remembers what you say. He asks about your work and actually waits for the answer. I spent a year deciding what kind of husband a wheelchair made him, and I never once noticed the kind of husband his character made him, because I wasn't looking for that." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Gloria understood, watching her aunt now seated at the lunch table, carefully polite with Daniel in a way that still carried faint traces of old discomfort, that some wounds close slowly, unevenly, and that trust once broken by cruelty takes longer to rebuild than the cruelty itself took to inflict. But it was honest. And for Gloria, that mattered more than a swift, tidy forgiveness ever could have. "Do you ever regret it?" her mother asked quietly, helping Gloria clear the table after lunch, the two of them alone in the kitchen for the first time in months. "Keeping the truth from us for so long? It caused so much unnecessary pain." Gloria considered the question honestly, the way she considered most things now. "No. If I'd told you from the beginning, I'd never have known whether your blessing was for him or for his money. Now I know. And so does he. That's worth more to both of us than a year of smoother conversations would have been." Her mother nodded slowly, drying a plate with more care than the task required. "I raised you to be practical. I never expected you to be wiser than me about something this important." "You didn't raise me to be practical, Mummy," Gloria said gently. "You raised me to pay attention to people. I just paid attention to the right one." Daniel's rehabilitation initiative, a year in, had funded equipment and training across 11 clinics in Lagos, quietly changing the standard of care for spinal injury patients who could never have afforded such treatment otherwise. The same kind of patient, unremarkable and unglamorous to the outside world, that Daniel himself had once been, before anyone knew his name meant anything beyond a line on a medical chart. He never publicized his own story alongside the initiative, despite his communications team's repeated suggestions that his personal journey would make for powerful marketing. The point was never to make myself the hero of it, he told Gloria, the one time she asked him directly why he kept his own recovery out of the press materials. The point was that somebody treated me like I mattered before they knew what I was worth. I'd rather build something that does the same for other people, quietly, than turn my own story into a spectacle. That's very like you, Gloria said, refusing the easy applause. I already got the only applause that ever mattered, he said, taking her hand. The day you decided I was worth choosing, long before anyone told you it was safe to. Gloria's family learned, publicly and painfully, that judging a person's worth by what's visible on the surface, a wheelchair, an assumption, a story told without asking a single real question, says far more about the person judging than the person being judged. Aunty Grace learned that an apology arriving only after the truth becomes convenient is a smaller, lesser thing than the honesty it should have carried from the very beginning. And that real change means sitting with that discomfort rather than rushing past it. And Gloria and Daniel learned together that the truest test of love isn't grand gestures or public reveals. It's choosing someone and being chosen back entirely on the strength of who you actually are. Long before the rest of the world decides you're worth the attention. If this story reminded you that character is worth more than appearances, hit subscribe, tell us in the comments what you would have done in Gloria's position, and share this with someone who needs to hear tonight that real love was never about what other people can see.